Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to another session in the Fall 2023 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. And I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover the merit review process at NSF.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our discussion of NSF's merit review process for the Fall 2023 Virtual Grants Conference. I'm Nigel from the Division of Astronomical Sciences. I've been a program officer at NSF for over 20 years at this point, and I'm here with my colleagues, Cynthia Suchman from Geosciences, Kelsey from Chemistry, and Karen Santoro, who is our ethics expert from the Office of the General Counsel. And we're going to be discussing the things that we feel you need to know in terms of proposal preparation and the review process that will help you to get your project underway. The mantra you will see at the bottom of this slide, ask early, ask often. People are often reluctant to consult their program director, program officer. The terms are interchangeable, but we like to emphasize that it is part of our job to help you to get your proposal in acceptably and well reviewed. So we'll be talking about the things that we think you need to know about this process. Don't forget, ask early, ask often. I'm going to cover the initial stages where we try to ensure that your proposal comes in and is acceptably processed. This is the timeline. You might want to keep this available for later reference. It discusses how long it takes us generally to get to the level of a recommendation. Pre-submission stages, like the announcement of opportunity, and then submission, then it gets processed by a program officer, and then it goes through a sequence of reviews aimed at discussing the intellectual merit of the project, the broader impacts on society of the project, and of course the financial accuracy and appropriateness of the request. So let's delve in. Reminders. You might think this was obvious. Read the funding opportunity. But you would be amazed. Well, maybe you wouldn't be amazed. We tend to be a bit surprised by the number of people who ask us questions that strongly suggest that they did not, in fact, read the paperwork of the opportunity to which they're applying. Now, I would be the first to admit that NSF paperwork is not a model of concise clarity, but the information is all there, and you can get it there by paying attention. So when you prepare a proposal, make sure you know what you're applying to. Make sure you are meeting all of the review criteria that are listed. It helps if you understand how we're going to process it, but that, of course, is what we're going to do here. Try not to leave things out or make mistakes, leave a section out, or any of these things. It's amusing sometimes how many proposals arrive with a sentence that says, according to add reference here, that somebody has failed to go back through and check that they added all their needed pieces. And then check that it's complete, and please check it before the deadline for the competition you're applying to. It's very important to check that the proposal as received in NSF system is the same as the proposal that you feel you submitted. This is important for two reasons. Firstly, people make mistakes. I have had a section uploaded in the wrong part of the proposal, which is something obvious that you would see if you downloaded the proposal back from the system. We've also had process errors that the NSF system creates a PDF file out of your submission. It does not take your submission verbatim. So even a PDF file can be processed, and occasionally there are font errors or other small mistakes that could lead to inconvenience in the review process. So we recommend that after you've got the proposal submitted, you do not heave a sigh of relief and immediately leave. Come back in, download the complete proposal to your system, and make sure that what we got is what you think you sent us. So what happens? Proposals come in, they're sent to the correct program. We and other staff will go through and make sure, firstly, complete, that is, no sections missing. This is a less common error because the system now stops you submitting if it thinks that there are missing pieces. We'll check that the proposal is on time before the deadline, if there is one, or appropriate for the program. And we will make sure that the preparation requirements are met. The preparation requirements will be discussed during this presentation, but that covers both the specific solicitation, the specific program you're applying to, and the general rules set out in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. So we have the option to return a proposal without review if it doesn't meet the requirements. We do our best to take proposals if we possibly can, because we know how much work goes into preparing them. Sometimes it can be not as obvious to people in the community as it is to people inside the NSF which program is the right place. We do get a number of emails regularly from people saying, is this proposal appropriate for your program? And we usually try to find the most appropriate program. But if it ends up being submitted to one where we think it isn't, we will try to transfer it and notify you that it's been moved to a different program. This is the introduction to the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. I will say it's very important to pay attention to the fact that this is also the Policies Guide for award. If you get an award, people often relax and don't realize that there are requirements to follow for the award, in addition to the requirements for getting your proposal in and acceptable. So I get to talk about the sad thing, which is when we have to send a proposal back, which is generally something we don't like to do. All the required sections are described in the PAPPG. If there are any deviations from these requirements, they'll be spelled out in a specific solicitation. A number of these are rather harder to get wrong because the NSF systems have been improved and enhanced to do a fair amount of checking on submitted proposals. This is another reason that we emphasize not getting your proposal up close to the proposal deadline for the program. In case the system says, wait a minute, something's wrong, it can take a little while to figure out what to change and how to fix it. And if you have come close to the deadline, you may miss it trying to fix those features and persuade the system to accept it. So we are very serious about broader impacts. This is the discussion of how your project will improve things for society, how it will improve their understanding of what we do, and why it is that we're using taxpayer funds to support your project. The prior NSF support requirement trips up a number of people. It has to be included and it has to cover all of the results that you have had from an award that ended in the past 5 years, not began, but ended. It's common for people to think that support means funding. It doesn't. Essentially, if you have been on a proposal as a PI or co-PI in any NSF award, you must discuss the results. This is one of the commonest reasons that we send back proposals without review, because we have a record of all the proposals that have been awarded, so we know if you got an award. Data management plan must be included. It is possible to have a data management plan that says, I don't need a data management plan, but that's then subject to review. And I must say, in most cases, people who say that have been wrong, and they did need a data management plan. If you're asking for funding of a postdoc on the budget, then you must also include the mentoring requirement, how you're going to help the individuals that you hire as postdoctoral researchers move forward in their careers. So these sections are common reasons why a proposal will be returned without review. Perhaps less common, inappropriate for funding. There are very few things which the NSF will not fund. There's a relatively small success rate, but there are very few projects that are inappropriate, but there are some. If in doubt, ask early, ask often. Contact a program officer. We have had the occasional one where the activity, particularly for things with an externally imposed deadline, that there isn't time for us to process the proposal and issue an award before the activity. This is less common, but also a reason that we introduced a separate funding mechanism called RAPID, which is discussed elsewhere. We have had people not invited to submit a full proposal who nevertheless went ahead and submitted. Again, this is relatively uncommon. Most people who send in a preliminary proposal are well aware that if it's a mandatory invite, do not invite, that they need to be invited. The last bullet occasionally causes trouble, a duplicate or substantially similar to a proposal already under consideration. Because of the occasional boundary concerns where it's not clear where a proposal should be submitted, we do occasionally see the same project submitted to more than one program. Common examples would be a project with a significant computational feature submitted both to a disciplinary program and to a computer science program. In most cases, when we find this, we will ask the proposer, i.e. you, to withdraw one of the proposals. This is something that comes under discussion. If you are planning to submit to more than one program, we really recommend that you contact program officers in both programs, or even 3 programs if you've found 3 that fit, so that we're well aware of this, and we'll probably try and dissuade you, and then co-review the proposal that comes in. Other reasons, well, there are page limitations, formatting, and so on. It's pretty rare now, but it's still occasionally true that we get a big envelope in the mail, whereas proposals are now required to be submitted electronically. A not responsive return without review is also relatively unusual, but we have seen that where somebody submits a project that actually does not fit. Most cases, we try to move it to a program that it does fit, but that's not always possible. If you miss the deadline, date and time, if time is specified, it's almost always 5 p.m. in your local time zone. If you miss the deadline, then you won't get in. In fact, the systems, generally speaking, now will not allow you to submit after the deadline date and time. So we don't see very many of those anymore. If we have declined to fund a proposal, then there is this allowance that says if we've already turned it down, we're not going to consider it again without substantial revision. This occasionally causes some difficulty over the definition of substantial revisions, but this is another case where ask early, ask often is important. It may be that the program officers will say, substantial revision is more or less than you actually feel it is. And of course, occasionally there's a mistake made and we get a proposal for a project that's already been funded. That, again, is relatively unusual. Does happen. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Cynthia, who's going to discuss how the review process goes, and particularly the points of relevance for you when preparing a proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. My name is Cynthia Suchman, and I am a program director in the Division of Ocean Sciences, which is part of the Geosciences Directorate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about merit review criteria. So before I start, I just wanted to say, when I think about merit review criteria and our guiding principles, it's both from the perspective of writing proposals, because I think it's really important to speak to your audience when you're writing a proposal, and also from the perspective of potentially reviewing proposals. So I'm approaching this as folks who might be interested in both aspects. But just to begin, to provide some greater context, the guiding principles that NSF uses are that all projects should be the highest quality and have the potential to advance and potentially transform the frontiers of knowledge. And in aggregate, meaning the collection of proposals that we support over time should contribute more broadly to achieving societal goals. And there's also some language in our proposal guide that says that meaningful assessment and evaluation of NSF-funded projects should be based on appropriate metrics, keeping in mind the likely correlation between the effect of broader impacts and the resources provided to implement those projects. Now, I'm going to try to explain what I think that means in a little more plain language. So the assessment should scale to the resources requested, or think about either in writing a proposal or in reviewing a proposal, the project scope, and set some very clear goals and objectives that can be achieved within that scope, both in terms of personnel and budget and the scientific scope. And in addition, be sure to place that in a broader context, meaning what will the work that you propose, whatever scope or scale it is, contribute to the wider scientific enterprise? And those are the things that you're going to be trying to convey. And those are the things that NSF is interested in supporting. So with that in mind, our specific review criteria, there are two for every NSF proposal. I also wanted to mention, and I think this had come up earlier in the conversation today, that there are solicitations with specific review criteria. So there may be additional criteria as well, but every NSF proposal will have two criteria, which are intellectual merit and broader impacts. So in an evaluation of NSF proposals, we are asking reviewers to consider what the proposers want to do, why they want to do it, how they plan to do it, how will they know if they succeed, and what benefits will accrue if it's successful. So this applies to both the technical aspects of the proposal and the way in which the project may make broader contributions to society. So the intellectual merit of a proposal is the potential to advance knowledge. For broader impacts, that's a criteria that encompasses the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. I would encourage you to go to some of the Directorate presentations and Q&A sessions to talk a little bit more about broader impacts, because that's an area where we get a lot of questions about what that means. And from my perspective, coming from Geosciences, what we try to convey is that it isn't a checklist of things you must do to have broader impacts. Whatever fits best within the interests of the proposers, the capabilities of your institutions. It can be a range of things, but it shouldn't try to be everything. I would say my advice would be not to overpromise what you're going to do. This gets back to the scaling of what your project is going to do. And it can be wise to make sure that it's directly connected to the work that you propose. That sometimes we get comments, again, in my program, if the broader impacts are not as well integrated into the intellectual merit as they might be. So within each of those review criteria, there are 5 review elements, and reviewers are instructed to consider all 5 for both criteria. The potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different fields, and that's for intellectual merit. And what is the potential for the proposal to benefit society or advance those desired societal outcomes or broader impacts. We also ask reviewers to consider to what extent the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts, and whether the plan for carrying out the proposed activities is well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on sound rationale, and does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success. Now, for this, one thing to keep in mind is this is where having very clear objectives and a clear plan for how you're going to accomplish those objectives can be very important, including things like analysis, how you're going to have your data circle back and address those objectives is going to be really important. So, and in particular, also for broader impacts, think about how you're going to describe how you're going to determine if you're successful. Another question is, how well qualified is the individual, team, or institution to conduct the proposed activities? So consider who needs to be on your team, how they're going to participate, and how they're going to be supported. Are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at the home institution or through collaborations to carry out the proposed activities? So that gets back to your scaling question. Can you do what you propose to do at the scale at which you propose to do it? So when it comes down to actually reviewing proposals, how does NSF do that? We've talked a little bit about what the criteria are that we're asking reviewers to comment on and things they should keep in mind when preparing proposals. But this is an overview of the mechanics of how we actually do that. And it varies across different programs of NSF. So one thing I would always advise you to do is talk to the managing program officer if you're submitting a proposal to a program, if you have questions about how it will be reviewed. Because again, I think that understanding who's going to be evaluating your proposal can be very helpful when you're writing it. There are a couple different ways that we approach peer review at NSF. Proposals can go out for review to ad hoc reviewers, which are independent written reviews where people receive an email requesting their comments, and they're chosen based on their specific expertise in the field related to the proposal. And there are some programs at NSF that use ad hoc review only, meaning that is the input that the proposal that the program officers would have. There are these independent written reviews that are requested. We also often will convene panels, which are live, in-person, or virtual face-to-face sessions of a group of reviewers that are usually discussing several projects at once. A lot of times these panel reviewers will also submit ad hoc reviews, and they will often have broader scientific knowledge than ad hoc reviewers because they are chosen for their broad view of a field or their broad expertise or their ability to comment on a suite of proposals rather than just one single proposal. And keep in mind that if your proposal is multidisciplinary or has some cross-cutting themes or may have a multi-step process, some programs at NSF operate that way. You may receive more than one panel summary. There may be more than one panel evaluation. So your proposal may be evaluated by multiple panels. And so while there are some programs at NSF that use panel only reviews, there are also others that use, like mine, that use both ad hoc reviews or those independent written reviews, and then also a panel discussion. And in my program, for example, the panel will have access to those ad hoc written reviews, which are often received before the panel. They will read those and incorporate those into their understanding of the community's view of the proposal, discuss those reviews, and come up with a consensus conversation about the strengths and weaknesses of a particular proposal. And so, again, it varies very much across different parts of NSF. There are also different types of proposals or activities that do not require external review at NSF and are reviewed internally. And these can range from things like planning proposals, which, if you read our proposal guide, can be activities to try to develop collaborations for large complex projects, or other kinds of proposals at NSF that may not be appropriate for external review, like quick turnaround, rapid response research grants, or RAPIDs, or those that are submitted to the early concept grants for exploratory research, or EAGR, which are so potentially groundbreaking that they are deemed inappropriate for external review. There are a number of supplements that don't go out for review. Career life balance are relatively new to NSF in the last several years, but are a powerful way to keep projects running when personnel have to take family leave. So be aware of those. But also other supplements, less than 20% of awards and within original scope do not need external review. And also proposals for conferences under $50,000 can be reviewed internally at NSF. So I spoke a little bit about this, but you may wonder how we select reviewers to serve as either ad hoc reviewers or panelists at NSF. Again, we are looking for reviewers with specific content expertise, particularly for ad hoc or those external written reviews. And we also may be looking for reviewers who have broad thinking general science or education expertise, particularly for panelists or for career proposals, which are a special type of proposals for pre-tenure faculty. So how do we find you? A lot of us have knowledge in our research area of what the community looks like. And so we call on the people we know have specific expertise after reading proposals. We look very carefully at the references listed in proposals. Those are often a really good source of others in the community that are doing similar work. If we've gone to conferences or are looking at programs at recent conferences, that will also show us who's working at the cutting edge. And we use searches through computers. I use Google Scholar a lot, but there are a bunch of others that folks use. And we have some automated systems at NSF as well that are helping with that. We use people who have reviewed proposals before on occasion. If you've a resubmitted proposal, sometimes in my program, we'll ask one or two people who've seen it before to have a second look. Another really powerful thing that you can do if you're writing a proposal to NSF is to recommend reviewers. This is very helpful for those of us who are dealing with a wide range of proposals. So if you can think of people who you don't have conflicts of interest with, who you think would make good reviewers, please feel free to include those in your proposal as a single copy document. That can be very helpful. And I did want to mention, we do avoid using reviewers with conflicts of interest, and my colleague Karen Santoro will talk a little bit more about that, what constitutes a conflict. So we're looking for folks who can give a hopefully unbiased view of your work that are not your current collaborators. So it can be really valuable to serve as a reviewer for NSF. So if you are not currently reviewing and have interest in doing so, do reach out to your program officer at whatever program that you are interested in submitting to, or you think you're qualified to review for. Introduce yourself, say that you want to serve as a reviewer or a panelist. Try to get a sense of what the panel schedule is and how it might fit in with yours. I will often start using reviewers after looking at their CV to see what their specific expertise is. In particular, looking for a diverse suite of reviewers. It's always good to know who's coming into the field. Recent new assistant professors, people with postdoctoral experience, we use them in my program, and I'm always happy to start incorporating early career folks. They're often really up to speed on the latest in the field. And don't be shy if you want to review and you haven't heard anything. You can send another note. I wouldn't do it too often, but we will keep you in mind for the future. So what are we asking of reviewers at NSF? We're asking them to review all the proposed material and consider the 2 NSF merit review criteria, plus any specific program criteria in the solicitation or any other specific criteria. We are asking them to look at the adequacy of the proposed project plan, including the budget, the resources, the timeline, to consider, in their view, the priorities of the scientific field and the NSF program, the potential risks and benefits of the project. And we are asking reviewers to make written comments on the strengths and weaknesses of the proposed content. Now, one thing I will say is we also, in my program at least, spend a lot of time advising panels to rate the proposal that was written rather than the one you wish had been written. So it's really important to be very careful in how you're presenting what you're doing rather than relying on assumptions that reviewers are making. We also spend a fair bit of time cautioning reviewers about implicit bias and trying to minimize that. So the review panel discusses the merits of the proposal with a range of panelists and also potentially with input from written reviews. They're asked to write something we call a panel summary based on the discussion that summarizes the strengths and weaknesses of the proposal, both in terms of the intellectual merit, the broader impacts, and any specific review criteria. And while panelists are not asked, at least in my program, to compare, or I think in general, to compare proposals directly with one another, we are asking them to rank those proposals in that they are helping NSF assess the relative merits of different proposals without direct comparison. It is different when you're looking at a suite of proposals versus an individual proposal. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about the benefits to you in serving as a panelist or actually an ad hoc reviewer. It's a great way to serve the community. And it also helps us to make recommendations on our research investments. So you can have a direct influence on potential funding recommendations going forward. For providing solid advice. You also yourself will gain firsthand knowledge of the merit review process. It's a really good way to learn some cautions about what not to do in proposals. Things that you find puzzling or gaps you see in a range of proposals can often help improve your own proposal writing. You will have access to NSF Program Officers, get to know us a little bit, but also meet some of your colleagues in the field if you're serving on a panel. And next, we're going to be hearing about conflicts of interest from my colleague, Karen Santoro.
Thank you, Cynthia. NSF's review process is known as the gold standard because in addition to rigorous scientific review, we do take conflicts of interest very seriously. Why? First, to remove any bias due to a panelist's affiliations with institutions and individuals that could affect the review. And second, to ensure fairness and to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. Next. When you serve on an NSF panel, you become a government employee. And as a government employee, you are subject to federal ethics rules and regulations, including those covering conflicts of interest. Examples of institutional affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest laws include your employer. If you're a professor at a university, you will not review a proposal from that university because the law treats the university's financial interests as if they were your very own. Other examples of covered institutional affiliations include anywhere else you hold a position. You're an ad hoc faculty at a different university, or a consultant for a company. If you're looking for a new job, you won't review a proposal from that potential employer. If you're on the board of directors of an organization or serve as an officer of a scientific society, you will not review proposals from that organization or the society. Next. Examples of individual affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest laws include your spouse, business partner, PhD advisor, and your PhD students. Your co-PIs and co-authors in the last 4 years and your co-editors in the last 2 years are also covered. We're seeing more situations where there can be 50 or 100 co-authors or 20 or 30 editors. If you're in one of these situations and you don't even know all the co-authors or co-editors, please be sure to let the NSF program director know this, because NSF may be able to waive these types of conflicts. In closing, it's very important to let NSF know about any affiliation you have with an individual or an institution in a proposal, even if it didn't appear on these slides. This disclosure allows NSF to determine whether there is a conflict, and if so, how best to manage it. Now I'll pass it off to Kelsey Cook, who will tell us about funding.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm Kelsey Cook. I'm from the Division of Chemistry, where I lead the Chemical Measurement Imaging Program, and I have oversight responsibility for one of our mid-scale facilities. I've been at NSF for a little over 18 years. It's my job today to talk to you about funding decisions. I'd like to spend the next few minutes summarizing how NSF uses reviewer advice and other considerations to formulate funding recommendations. Whenever I brief panelists, I remind them that they are not making any decisions. They're only giving advice, and I tell them that there are 3 audiences for that advice: the program, the principal investigator or PI, and the division director. The division director has the hard job of balancing recommendations across all of the programs within the division. But I can tell you that at least in my division, it's very rare for a DD to reject a program recommendation. In that context, I'd like to take a little deeper view now of the reviewer's role. In most cases, we receive 2 kinds of advice from reviewers. We ask individual reviewers to rate the proposal on a 5-point scale from excellent to poor, based on how well it meets our merit review criteria. Many reviewers choose multiple ratings, for example, checking both the E and the V box to indicate an intermediate rating. I've occasionally seen ratings like E/F, where a reviewer might want to indicate that some elements of the proposal are very strong while others are much less well developed. There's no truth to the rumor that a proposal needs all excellent ratings to be awarded. Conversely, receiving all excellence is not a guarantee of getting an award. Reviewer comments are much more important than their scores, because in part the scores are not in general uniformly calibrated. Stated another way, we pay a lot more of attention to the reasons for the recommendation than we do to the boxes checked. The other kind of advice we solicit comes from a review panel. We ask panelists to consider their own and other comments, and then to formulate some manner of a funding recommendation. In my division, we usually ask the panel to assign high, medium, or low priority to each proposal, reserving the last category for proposals that need major revision to become competitive. This information becomes available to the PI along with the reviews and the panel summary as soon as the division director concurs with the program recommendation. Even for awards, but especially for declinations, this information offers valuable guidance which can enhance the competitiveness of a revised proposal or the impact and success of an award. Be sure to look for and read the PO comments, which are also available in research.gov. They distill the key factors motivating the program's recommendation. This slide summarizes the points relevant to our use of reviewer feedback. It's mostly common sense, but I want to focus briefly on the third bullet. When I was trained as a program officer, I was instructed that funding limitations are nearly always in play, but lack of funds is almost never, of and by itself, an adequate reason to recommend a declination. Proposals we recommend for awards are more competitive than those we recommend for declination in terms of broader impact, intellectual merit, and/or their contribution to portfolio balance. This leads to my next slide, which considers life after declination. Resubmission is both a key practice and a common response to the review process. My first two NSF proposals were declined. Not an unusual phenomenon when you consider that the overall funding rate at NSF tends to be on the order of 25%. But my third proposal was fully funded. In fact, it was co-funded by NSF and the Army Research Office. My point is that merit review process not only helps inform funding recommendations, but it's meant to provide feedback to help members of the scientific community write more competitive proposals on important topics. Read and review documentation at least 2 or 3 times, preferably spaced by a day or two, before deciding on your next steps. If you look for constructive advice, you will find it. The program officer can help you distinguish key concerns from relatively minor issues, but give yourself a few days to recover from the initial impact of receiving a notice of declination. Revised proposals generally are better and fare better. As mentioned by Nigel, they must, by policy, be different. NSF will not review a proposal twice, even if there are minor cosmetic revisions. It's a good idea to seek feedback from your colleagues and students to help you identify points in the proposal that may seem obvious to you, but that could benefit from clarification. In general, you want to make crystal clear the novelty and the need for the proposed research, as well as the plan for its execution. We strive to be fully transparent about the availability of a formal reconsideration process. The process begins with a conversation with the program officer and/or the division director. Section 4D of the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide addresses formal reconsideration. A key phrase states that if the PI is not satisfied that the proposal was fairly and reasonably reviewed, the PI may request reconsideration by the cognizant assistant director or office head. Notice that the basis for a formal reconsideration is generally the fairness and reasonableness of the process. Panels don't always reach consensus, and even when they do, programs must weigh other factors such as portfolio balance when formulating recommendations. Disagreement with a particular opinion or identification of a misunderstanding in a specific review is rarely, if ever, a sign of an unfair process. Reconsideration includes a final option of a formal request from the institution to the Deputy Director of NSF. Having addressed what happens when a proposal is declined, I'd like to wind up by addressing what happens in the happier circumstance that award is recommended. This slide summarizes the flip side of the previous 3 slides. Note that the bullet list is not a checklist for every proposal. Certainly, if your proposal is strong in all 8 of these criteria, it's likely to be competitive. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't bother to submit, for example, a proposal that doesn't address, air quotes, specific programmatic considerations. You can't submit an EPSCoR proposal if you're not in an EPSCoR state. And you can't submit a career proposal if you're not a tenured track assistant professor. Not every proposal must have educational impact or components targeting broadening participation. But certainly those elements can enhance the competitiveness of any proposal. I'd like to draw special attention to the bullet on other support of the PI. This is a required section of all proposals, and we have recently added a requirement that PIs and co-PIs update this information in their annual reports. I find it frustrating when PIs create a master list and reuse it without editing. For example, annual updates should include only new support. It's not necessary to relist awards you've already reported. Your credibility will suffer if you list the current proposal and indicate that it has no overlap with itself. Please take a few minutes to customize this document every time you use it. It's probably also worth highlighting what we mean by portfolio balance, something I've mentioned several times in the past few minutes. In balancing its portfolio, a program needs to consider the topical distribution among relevant subfields, as well as such factors as the geographic, demographic, and institutional diversity of supported investigators and awardee institutions. The final step in the award process is the issuance of an award, in most cases by the NSF Division of Grants and Agreements. It is hugely frustrating to move all the way to the end of the review process, only to discover that the PI is precluded from receiving an award because of a late report. In general, NSF annual reports are due 90 days before the end of the grant year in order to allow time for processing. If the report is not submitted and approved by the anniversary date, all funding actions are blocked for the PI and any co-PIs. We realize that this means the first annual report only covers 9 months. Please do not wait until the end of the first year to prepare and submit your first report. It will be late, and that will block further funding actions, including funding increments, supplements, and even no-cost extensions. Timely reporting is easy, and it's important. I'd also like to mention another relatively new pitfall. The federal government recently changed from using DUNS numbers from Dun & Bradstreet to a new system for award management, or SAM, institutional ID. Unlike the DUNS number, the SAM ID requires annual renewal by the institution. If your institution's SAM ID is not current, no award can be made. It can take a while to renew a SAM, even for major institutions with extended funding records. If there are authorized organizational representatives in the audience, I urge you to check your SAM renewal date and to be sure to keep the ID current. For the PIs in the audience, please remind your research office to stay on top of this. Just like a missing report pitfall, it's extremely frustrating to reach the precipice of an award and to be thwarted by missing us or expired SAM ID. I hope you found this session to be helpful, and I understand that the slides are available to you. I urge you to reach out to any of the presenters or to others as appropriate at NSF for additional information. The first 2 bullets in this last slide should help finding the right person to ask. If you want to see the view from the other side, the 3rd bullet can help you find out about becoming an NSF rotator. At this point, I think it's our plan to open the floor for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, and welcome back. I'd like to invite our panelists back. We are missing Kelsey. He is unable to join us for the Q&A today, but Cynthia and Nigel are here, and both have been answering questions in the Q&A. Quite a lot of questions have been answered, so keyboards are smoking over there. But I did want to. We do have some time for questions, so you can continue to submit some questions in the Q&A. We'll try and get to them. If one of the things that I would recommend, when you have questions, and I mentioned this in the proposal preparation session a couple hours ago, when you do have questions that are related to a specific funding opportunity, and this has been answered in a lot of the Q&A today, you really want to reach out to the program officers that are responsible for that program. They're the ones that wrote the funding opportunity. They should be able to answer any questions that you might have. And then again, if you have questions related to an existing award, we'd encourage you to reach out first to the grants officer that is identified in the award notice. So for you, I'm just going to kind of go top to bottom in the Q&A and pose these questions, and we'll see what we can get to in the time that we have remaining. So the first question is asking about specifics for RUI proposals in terms of merit review. RUI, for everyone here, is facilitating research at primarily undergraduate institutions. Cynthia, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I wanted to start because this is a category along with careers where there is a solicitation, but the proposals themselves are often evaluated as part of core programs or in the directorates and divisions and programs to which they best fit. So this is a very difficult question to answer because it's another one where the answer might be to talk to your program officers, and there are different folks that are listed, or the target programs to which you typically would submit. It's a question for them. What I can say about my own home program, which is in the Geosciences Directorate Division of Ocean Sciences, we routinely receive proposals or proposals from folks who are primarily undergraduate institutions, and they are reviewed in a very similar way as our other proposals. They get ad hoc and panel review, and we consider them as part of that portfolio balance that Kelsey was talking about. And so it's not that there's any specifics in terms of the review criteria, but it is a specific category of things that we look at when we're trying to think about our whole program. Same is true with careers in my program, and that may vary across NSF, but that's why I thought we should answer that one live.
Okay, great. Next question is, can you elaborate on the criteria where we say it is inappropriate for funding by NSF? Anybody that wants to take that question?
There are very few areas that are inappropriate for NSF. There are a couple which are specifically excluded by law. For example, space-based activities are the responsibility of NASA, not of NSF, and experimentation on human subjects. There are human-related activities in our biological sciences directorate and other areas. We have a physics of living systems program, for example, but generally speaking, clinical research on humans is not an NSF area. So there are very few that have no home anywhere at NSF.
And by research on humans, you're talking about biomedical type, because we do have a social, behavioral, and economic sciences, which does.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, clinical research. Sorry. Thank you for clarifying. Yes. We do psychological stuff all the time.
Okay. Next question is could be quite a large question. What does NSF consider to be societal goals? Now, we used to have a document that had examples of broader impacts, but I don't think we have that anymore, because people would take those examples and just transfer them into proposals. So do we have an answer for this one, whether it's broad or specific to what NSF considers to be societal goals?
Boy, It's a tough one, as Jeremy says. It's a very broad one. I mean, I know it sounds a bit silly, but broader impacts actually is very broad. But there are things that happen every year. We get a presidential memo emphasizing areas of relevance that the office of the president considers particularly appropriate at this time. So there are those things. Different programs actually specify their interest in their solicitations or on the general website of the division or program to which you're applying. So in that sense, I'm afraid this is definitely one of those ask the relevant program officers, the ask early, ask often mantra. So, we consider societal goals what society tells us they are.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is asking if two PIs submit proposals on similar ideas, how is that managed by the reviewers?
Well, I don't like your reviewers, Cynthia. Mine tend to argue a lot about it. It's one of those issues. I mean, I tell people regularly that one of the things you have to address in a proposal is why this idea is the right idea at this time and why you're the right person to do it. If it's the right idea at the right time, it's not at all surprising if we get more than one proposal for that right idea at the right time. And we ask them to do direct comparisons. That's part of the ranking. We just tell them, compare, contrast. Sometimes I wish we were NASA. NASA, I know, have occasionally taken to things like that and told the proposers to go ahead and collaborate and submit a single proposal between them. But NSF doesn't do that.
Yeah, and I don't, as a lot of things for NSF, don't feel comfortable necessarily speaking for other programs. So I actually addressed this question in the Q&A in a written form, this compare and contrast versus evaluate proposals independently. Because I do think there's a slight difference there. And in my own program, as Nigel said, I agree with him, people are often talking about the same things when you're talking about cutting edge research. So it's very hard to do science in a vacuum where you're not having some level of crosstalk within the community. And so it's certainly possible for multiple PIs to be working on a similar topic at the same time. And I certainly wouldn't, depending on the scale of the project, out of hand call them in competition with each other if the quality of the research is high and the budgets are reasonable for my program. And that's what I would advise a panel that had very similar proposals, that it look at the science that was proposed and rate what you see, not necessarily pit proposals directly against each other, because that's kind of how we have to hash things out and part of that portfolio balance later on in this program. I don't know if that really addresses the question, but sometimes I'll hear from reviewers who say, this is very close to what I do. I don't feel comfortable reviewing it. And then we have a conversation about whether they would consider that some sort of conflict to their reviewing a proposal, even if they don't otherwise have more of a statutory conflict with the proposal. When things get a little too close together, but that was not what your question was. So we try to be very careful about that as well.
Thank you. So the next question is asking about portfolio balance. And I suppose that if you asked 10 different program officers what portfolio balance looked like, you'd get, for their programs, you'd get 10 different answers. But
no, you get at least a dozen.
At least it doesn't. But since we have two program officers or program directors here, perhaps you could talk a little bit about what that means for your programs that you oversee.
Can I be a program manager instead?
Yeah, no. You can be whatever you want, Nigel.
This is one of those tricky ones because there are so many alternative criteria. We look at Research 1 universities versus teaching colleges versus 4-year. We look at PhD PIs versus non-PhD PIs. We look at all the demographics, underrepresented minorities, and it varies. I mean, our baseline is we're trying to fund the best science. We're here to promote the progress of science. And so sometimes it turns out that we cannot diversify the pool without digging down into less well-reviewed science. I mean, the sad thing is, I would argue that at least 80% of all the proposals we get are science worth funding. Some program officers drop that a bit, some increase it. And we generally fund, as Kelsey mentioned, 20 to 25%. So there's a lot of very good science being turned down. And that's sometimes where these criteria come in. You know, it's funny, but I regularly get people who are turned down saying, well, that's because you don't fund blank, whatever category they happen to be in. Right? NSF will fund every category of person you can think of, as long as you're not ineligible under law. And so the balance, it's going to depend what's important. You know, we get occasional directives that say, focus on undergraduate institutions, focus on EPSCoR states, focus on, generally the way we handle those requests for focus is by sort of increasing the success rate for those categories, rather than making separate programs for those categories. So, you know, I think Jeremy was right. It's something, I mean, I've been here 21 years now, and I've varied my own definition of portfolio balance.
Cynthia, anything to
I
add?
think that was a very complete answer. Same criteria. We try to fund, as you know, take into consideration all kinds of things, types of institutions, geography of institutions, demographics of the PIs. Sometimes if there are exceptional broader impacts in a proposal that would otherwise be in our gray areas, the way I think about the fundable proposals we may not have a budget for, there are things that can elevate that. And so we spend quite a bit of time trying to take all those different things into consideration within the proposals that we have in hand that we think are scientifically very strong.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is asking about, as the person writes, not being a PhD holder, how can that person's proposal be reviewed without suffering from quote unquote PhD bias, even if the proposal checks all the other levels? Is that something that you can touch on in terms of your experience with NSF proposals?
What I would say, just as a start, is that the institutions determine who can be an investigator, not NSF. So from a starting perspective, you know, we welcome proposals that are submitted by institutions with whoever they feel can be PIs. And then the review criteria is whether the person is qualified, not what their degree is in. And so the trick would be to make sure it's clear what the qualifications are, to spend notwithstanding whatever the academic qualifications are from the person. So, you know, I certainly know that I have reviewers that I've used that have master's degrees, but have great experience in the field routinely.
Yeah, and there are some areas of professional responsibility that don't actually use academic degrees. For example, in large projects, we do project management review, and project management reviewers are often certified project management professionals who do not have a university academic degree. We go by the expertise of the person, not the piece of paper they wave at us.
How does that translate to reviewers then? Do you see any non-PhDs coming as reviewers for proposals?
Yeah, that applies to both categories, proposers and reviewers.
Okay. The next question I see is asking about a career proposal. I don't know if we have the folks here to be able to answer that question, but is asking about preliminary data for a new lab. But perhaps we could take that question and talk about preliminary data that might be required for proposal. What are you expecting to see?
Gosh, that's too variable, really. I'm afraid you can't give a general answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
we like to expand the pool and have more institutions involved. I mean, we like getting proposals from people who haven't proposed before or institutions that haven't submitted before. It does require some effort. We have new awardee paperwork, which requires certification. So it can take longer to handle a new place, but we like it. But how much preliminary is needed? I can't answer that.
What I would say is when we see questions during review about preliminary data, I think where it tends to be used is to show evidence that the methods can work or that the PI has expertise. And so if you can demonstrate that in another way, that would be where it may not be required. But it's a tricky question because, like a lot of things for us, it depends. And so, again, looking at the review criteria, how do you demonstrate your expertise? How do you demonstrate that you can do the work? Do you need preliminary data versus have you published already on this or in this topic, or using these methods? So kind of thinking about it from the perspective of the reviewers, what would they need in hand to feel confident that you could do the work? And it's a bit tricky. So again, I think it really depends on the specifics. And this is another one where if you're thinking about a career proposal, it would be good to talk to the program officer in the program that you're targeting to hear a little bit more about their process and get their take on it.
Great. And also the career program does do, the deadlines are not until the summer, but there are, they do webinars just like, this to be able to field questions from the community. So I would recommend looking on the career program page for when there might be upcoming webinars. Question in terms of being a reviewer. What do you recommend in terms of, so if you haven't submitted a proposal to NSF before, does it make sense to try and become a reviewer before you submit a proposal, or does it matter? What are your thoughts on that? Cynthia, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I think it's great practice to review for NSF before writing a proposal, just so that you will then have the experience on the other side of what are the sorts of things that you are looking for as a reviewer, so that then you can write a proposal from that perspective. And so I think it's great. It's not required. So if you haven't reviewed for NSF, one thing you could do would be to perhaps ask colleagues to look at their proposals and make sure you're familiar with what the requirements are and talk to your colleagues about what they're looking for. I mean, it's slightly different to review for NSF than say for a journal, or you're not looking to improve something as a reviewer, you're looking to assess what's there. And I think that's a pretty fundamental difference. So it can be very helpful, but it isn't required, if that's the question.
Well, and then how do you recommend that folks let you know that they would like to be a reviewer?
Right. So in my field, which is biological oceanography, we're always trying to broaden our reviewer pool. Send an email to a program officer with a 2-page CV, say you're interested and available to review. Sometimes it takes a while to match reviewers with proposals that come in. But we are always looking to broaden that pool. So it's also a really good way to not only volunteer to review, but get some fundamental questions asked.
I see a question here that's asking about what proposers receive from reviewers. Should they always expect comments with every proposal that they received, or will they receive a letter ranking? Are there required comments? Perhaps you can talk about what it was touched on in the presentation, but I mean, I think it would be useful just to cover this again, what folks actually receive.
Right. Well, we're required, in fact, by law, to release reviews except under certain criteria. So whatever a reviewer says, we don't tell reviewers what to tell us. We rely on their expertise, their experience, and they tell us what they feel like. And sometimes they tell us things we find extreme, and sometimes they tell us things they're not supposed to do. So we try to share the maximum information. We try to make sure that none of the information that's shared jeopardizes any of the confidentiality that we promise reviewers. And we try to make sure that there's no personal or vituperative comments passed back to PIs. There are some areas where we do internal review, and sometimes the feedback is the opinions expressed by the program officers without external review. There's a lot of variation. If you feel you need more feedback, please contact the program officer who handled your proposal. I see this a lot. People sort of say, well, I didn't want to bother you, or I didn't want to disturb you. And I don't know what people are worried about if they're afraid that if they call me up, I'll actually mishandle their next proposal or something. But no, it really is part of our job to give you the feedback, to help you to do a better job next time. We don't enjoy turning things down. Actually, I suppose I shouldn't say that. There might be a few program officers who do enjoy it, but I don't know any. We like to help you to do better. So, if the feedback's not adequate, talk to us.
Cynthia, anything else to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, just that it will be variable across different programs. My program, we do ad hoc review and panel review, so and also provide program officer comments. So you would receive, my comments on the synthesis of what I saw in the panel summary and the reviews. You'd receive the panel summary, and the panelists would have access to those ad hoc reviews and the ad hoc reviewers. So it's a wealth of information sometimes. But like Nigel said, if you want help interpreting that and what the main points are, reach out to a program officer. There are other programs at NSF where there just be a panel summary. And so it really will vary. I think every program at NSF now will have a context statement that explains the way a proposal may have been reviewed. But again, the details will matter depending on where you submitted that proposal to and what the individual program does in terms of a review. So there are some programs that would have a panel ranking in a certain category, and others might use a totally different category. So we operate slightly differently.
Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists for being here today and presenting. I want to thank you for attending. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.